The Night I First Met Vincent van Gogh is a reflective personal narrative that explores how a single encounter with a work of art can become a turning point in one's inner life. Taking place in Houston in the mid 2000s, the story describes Thor Sivert Fritland's visit to a traveling exhibition from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York during a period marked by confusion and emotional disorientation within an unrecognized narcissistic relationship. The narrative centers on the moment Thor first saw Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night in person, an experience that felt unexpectedly intimate, grounding, and transformative. The piece examines how the painting's emotional turbulence and clarity mirrored Thor's own internal struggle to hold onto reality amid manipulation and gaslighting. It reflects Van Gogh's life of isolation, misunderstanding, and uncompromising honesty, drawing parallels between his insistence on painting what he truly saw and the author's emerging recognition of their own truth. Today's interview with Thor Sivert Fritland heads. The Night I First Met Vincent van Gogh. Thor Sivert Fritland, welcome back. It's genuinely great to have you here again. Our last conversation left a deep impression on many people, and we've been looking forward to picking up where we left off.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate being invited back. It's always good to have the space to expand on my thoughts a bit more.
That's exactly why you're here. You have a way of opening doors people didn't even know they needed, and the response has been tremendous. How does it feel to be back in the chair again?
It feels good, almost like returning to a conversation that never really ended. I'm grateful for the chance to continue it.
Then let's do just that. Let's dive into today's topic. The night Thor first met Vincent van Gogh. Thor, your story begins in a moment of deep confusion, emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. When you look back now, what stands out about that period of your life?
What stands out is how silent everything felt inside me. I was living in a marriage I didn't yet understand as abusive, but my body knew something was wrong long before my mind had the language for it. I felt hollow, disoriented, like I was slowly losing my grip on what was real.
And then you walked into the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. What changed at that moment?
It was like stepping into a different atmosphere. I didn't expect anything transformative. I was just going to see an exhibition. But when I turned the corner and saw the starry night, everything inside me stopped. It wasn't just a painting. It felt like a presence, a witness,
A witness to what?
to the truth I couldn't articulate yet. The turbulence in that sky, the clarity inside the chaos. It mirrored the emotional storms I was living through in an abusive narcissistic marriage. It was the first time something outside of me reflects what was happening inside of me without distortion.
So, the painting didn't just move you aesthetically, it recognized you.
Exactly. It felt like the painting was saying, "You're not imagining this. You're not crazy. Trust what you see." That was the beginning of my psychological awakening. No drama, simply a subtle, definite change.
You've described this encounter as the first step toward reclaiming your reality. How did that unfold?
Slowly, quietly. But once something inside my wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. I started noticing the gaslighting, the manipulation, the grooming, the way my sense of self was being eroded. And I started trusting my own perception again. That trust became the foundation of my healing.
And eventually, it led you out of marriage.
Yes, years later, I left. But the seed was planted that day in the museum. Van Gogh's painting didn't save me, but it showed me a version of myself I had forgotten existed. Someone who could still see clearly. Someone who could still feel truth in their bones.
It sounds like art has become more than art for you. It became a mirror.
A mirror and a companion. A reminder that even in isolation, even in distortion, there is a part of me that remains untouched. Van Gogh painted from that place, and standing in front of his work helped me find my way back to mine.
Thor, before we talk about the painting, I want to understand the landscape you were living in. What did your inner world look like back then?
It felt like walking through fog, not the peaceful kind, more like a fog that steals your sense of direction. I was in a marriage where my reality was constantly being questioned, but I didn't have the vocabulary for narcissistic abuse yet. I only knew that something inside me was dimming.
Did you feel it physically? Emotionally? Both.
Both. My body felt heavy, like it was carrying a truth I wasn't allowed to speak. Emotionally, I felt hollow. I kept trying to adjust myself to someone else's version of reality. And the more I did that, the more I disappeared.
That's a powerful word, disappeared.
It's the only one that fits. I wasn't living. I was being lived.
Thor, earlier you described that period of your life as walking through fog. I want to go deeper into that. What was it like to live in a narcissistic relationship and eventually a marriage that lasted 7 years?
It was like being slowly rewritten. At first, everything felt intense, magnetic. Narcissistic relationships often start that way: love bombing, idealization, the sense that someone finally sees you. But over time, the admiration turns into criticism, the warmth turns cold, and the person who once lifted you up begins to chip away at you piece by piece.
Did you notice the shift right away?
No, that's the thing. It's gradual. It's subtle. It's like erosion. You don't see it happening day by day, but one morning I wake up and realize the coastline of who I was has changed. I started doubting myself constantly. Every disagreement became my fault. Every emotional reaction was too much. Every boundary was selfish. And because I didn't have the language for narcissistic abuse yet, I assumed the problem was me.
That must have been incredibly isolating.
It was. Narcissistic abuse creates a kind of emotional starvation. I was always trying to earn back the version of the person I met in the beginning, the one who made me feel chosen. But that version never returns. You end up living on crumbs, convincing myself that they are a feast.
How did the relationship change once it became a marriage?
Marriage intensified everything. It's like the mask slipped further once the commitment was locked in. The criticism became sharper. The gaslighting is more frequent. The emotional distance is more punishing. There's a moment in narcissistic relationships where I stop trying to be happy and start trying not to upset them. That's when you know I was losing myself.
Did you feel trapped?
Absolutely. Not physically, but psychologically. Narcissistic abuse doesn't trap me with walls. It traps me with doubt, with guilt, with the belief that leaving would prove myself with the problem all along. And because the abuse wasn't physical, I kept telling myself it wasn't bad enough to leave. That's one of the most dangerous lies emotional abuse taught me.
What did 7 years of that do to your sense of self?
It hollowed me out. I became hypervigilant, always scanning for shifts in mood, tone, expression. I stopped trusting my own perceptions. I stopped expressing my needs. I stopped recognizing my own emotional landscape. By the end, I wasn't living as myself. I was living as a version of me that caused the least friction.
And yet, something inside you survived.
Yes, a small, quiet part. The part that still knew what truth felt like. The part that recognized honesty when it saw it. That's the part that responded to the starry night years later. That's the part that refused to die.
So even in the fog, something in you was waiting for a moment of clarity.
Exactly. And when that moment came, standing in front of Van Gogh's painting, it was like that small part finally had a voice again. It whispered, "This is real. You are real." And that whisper was enough to begin the long journey back to myself.
Thor, let's go back to the beginning. Before the fog, before the erosion, what were the early red flags? The ones you didn't recognize as red flags at the time.
The first red flag was intensity. It felt like it was being swept up in the current. Narcissistic relationships often start that way: fast, overwhelming, almost cinematic. You mistake intensity for intimacy. You mistake attention for connection. And because it feels so powerful, I didn't question it.
So, the beginning felt like a high.
Exactly. A high with no grounding. There was this sense of being chosen, of being elevated. But underneath that intensity was a subtle pressure to merge, to adapt, to become what they needed. I didn't see it then, but the relationship wasn't forming around who I was. It was forming around who they wanted me to be.
When did the tone start to shift?
Pretty early. But the shifts were small. A comment about how I should behave and the change in my consciousness learned through early childhood. A criticism disguised as concern, a joke that wasn't really a joke. And every time I reacted, I was told I was too sensitive or misinterpreting things. That's how gaslighting begins, not with big lies, but with tiny distortions that make me question my own emotional compass.
Did you feel yourself shrinking even then?
Yes, but I didn't recognize it as shrinking. I thought I was compromising. I thought I was a good partner. When you're empathetic, you're trained to adjust, to understand, to give the benefit of the doubt. Narcissists rely on that. They count on it.
What other early signs stand out now?
The inconsistency. One day I was adored. The next I was criticized. One moment I was the center of their world. The next I was an inconvenience. That push-pull dynamic creates emotional dependency. You start chasing the good moments, trying to earn them back. Another red flag was how everything eventually became about them. Their needs, their feelings, their narrative. My inner world slowly became irrelevant.
Did you ever try to express your needs?
I did. And that was another red flag. Whenever I expressed a need, it was met with irritation, dismissal, or turned back on me. I learned very quickly that having needs was dangerous. So, I stopped having them, or at least, I stopped voicing them.
That sounds like the beginning of self-abandonment.
It was. Narcissistic abuse doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with conditioning. You learn which parts of you are acceptable and which parts are punished. And over time, you amputate the parts that cause conflict. By the time the relationship became a marriage, I had already trimmed myself down to a version that fit their comfort.
Looking back, do you think you saw the red flags but didn't know how to interpret them?
Yes. My intuition whispered, but I didn't have the framework to understand what it was trying to tell me. And when you're in the early stages of a narcissistic relationship, the love bombing is so intoxicating that you override your own instincts. I told myself, everyone has flaws, or maybe I'm overreacting, or this is what love feels like. But it wasn't love. It was the beginning of a slow erasure.
And yet, even then, a part of you is watching.
A small part. The part that later recognized itself in Van Gogh's sky. The part that refused to die, even when everything around it was trying to rewrite its truth.
Thor, we've talked about the early red flags and how the gaslighting escalated. But I want to understand the deeper impact. What was the psychological cost of staying in that relationship for 7 years?
The cost was me. Not all at once, but slowly, like a long, quiet leak I didn't notice until the foundation is compromised. Narcissistic abuse doesn't just hurt me, it rewires me. It teaches me to distrust my instincts, to silence my needs, to question my own emotional reality. The longer I stayed, the more I became a stranger to myself.
What did that look like day to day?
It looked like I was walking on eggshells. It looked like rehearsing conversations in my head to avoid triggering her anger or withdrawal. It looked like apologizing for things I didn't do just to keep the peace. It looked like shrinking, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually.
Did you feel like you were disappearing?
Yes. And the terrifying part is that the disappearance felt normal after a while. When I lived in a distorted reality long enough, the distortion becomes home. I stopped noticing the weight I were carrying because I had been carrying it for so long.
What did it do to your sense of identity?
It fractured it. I became hyper-adaptable, constantly shifting to meet her expectations. I lost track of what I liked, what I wanted, what I believed. My identity became reactive instead of rooted. And when you lose your sense of self, you lose your internal compass. You can't tell what's right for you because you can't feel yourself anymore.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It was. But the pain was quiet. It wasn't dramatic. The erosion happened gradually, a steady draining of color. I didn't wake up to every day thinking, I'm suffering. I woke up thinking, if I just try harder, things will get better. That's the trap. You believe your suffering is a sign of your failure, not a sign of the relationship's dysfunction.
Did you ever feel like you were losing your mind?
Yes, that's one of the deepest costs. Gaslighting doesn't just distort your perception, it makes you doubt your sanity. I'd have moments of clarity, moments where I knew something was wrong, but those moments were quickly drowned out by guilt, confusion, or her version of events. I started to believe that my emotions were unreliable, that my memory was faulty, that my intuition was broken.
And yet you stayed.
I stayed because I didn't know I was being abused. I stayed because I thought love meant endurance. I stayed because I believed her narrative more than my own. And I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I had failed.
What was the emotional toll of that?
Chronic anxiety, emotional exhaustion, a constant sense of inadequacy. I lived in a state of hypervigilance, always scanning for danger, always anticipating the next shift in mood. My nervous system was on high alert for years. And when your body is in survival mode for that long, it changes you. It changes how you think, how you feel, how you relate to the world.
Did you ever feel truly alone?
Completely. Narcissistic relationships are paradoxical. You're technically with someone, but you've never felt more alone. The loneliness is profound because it's not the absence of another person. It's the absence of yourself.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is. And it's why the psychological cost is so high. You don't just lose your relationship. You lose the version of yourself you abandoned to survive it.
And yet, something in you endured.
Yes, a small, stubborn part. The part that recognized truth when it saw it. The part that responded to Van Gogh's sky. The part that refused to be erased. That part is what ultimately saved me.
Thor, you've described the psychological cost of staying, how it hollowed you out, how it made you doubt your own reality. But there's another layer I want to explore. What was happening inside you emotionally? What was the internal conflict between loyalty and self preservation?
That conflict was the core of everything. On one side, there was loyalty, this deep, almost instinctive commitment to the relationship, to the idea of partnership, to the belief that love means staying. On the other hand, there was a quiet, persistent instinct for survival. And those two forces were constantly at war inside me.
What did loyalty look like to you at that time?
Loyalty looked like endurance. It looked like giving the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt was screaming. It looked like explaining away the hurt, rationalizing the manipulation, telling myself, everyone has flaws, or maybe I'm expecting too much. Loyalty became a kind of self-sacrifice. I thought that if I just loved harder, tried harder, adapted more, things would get better.
And what did self preservation look like?
At first, it was barely a whisper. A feeling in my chest when something didn't sit right. A tightening in my stomach when I was blamed for something I didn't do. A sense of dread before certain conversations. Self-preservation wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a small flame refusing to go out.
Did you feel torn between those two parts of yourself?
Constantly. Loyalty told me to stay. Self-preservation told me something was wrong. Loyalty said, you made a commitment. Self-preservation said, you're disappearing. And because I didn't understand narcissistic abuse yet, I interpreted the conflict as a personal failing. I thought I was the one who couldn't love correctly.
That must have created a lot of guilt.
An enormous amount. Guilt became the glue that kept me in place. Every time I thought about leaving, I felt like I was betraying her, betraying the relationship, betraying the version of myself who believed in loyalty. But the truth is, I wasn't betraying anyone. I was trying to survive.
Did you ever feel like you were choosing between her and yourself?
Yes. And for years, I chose her. That's the tragedy of narcissistic abuse. You keep choosing the person who is hurting you because you've been conditioned to believe that choosing yourself is selfish through gaslighting. It took me a long time to realize that loyalty without reciprocity is self-destruction.
What finally shifted that balance?
The exhaustion, the emotional depletion, the realization that no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. And underneath all of that, the small part of me, the part that recognized truth in Van Gogh's sky, kept insisting that I deserved to exist. Eventually, self-preservation stopped whispering and started speaking clearly.
What did it say?
It said, "You can't save this relationship by sacrificing yourself." It said, "You're allowed to leave." It said, "Your life is worth more than your loyalty to someone who doesn't see me." And once I heard that, really heard it, the conflict didn't disappear, but the balance shifted.
So, the journey wasn't about choosing you over her. It was about remembering you existed.
Exactly. Self-preservation wasn't selfishness. It was self-recognition. It was the moment I realized that staying loyal to someone else shouldn't require abandoning myself.
Thor, we've talked about loyalty, self preservation, and the psychological cost of staying. But there's a moment many survivors describe, a moment when the body understands the truth long before the mind can accept it. Did you experience something like that?
Yes, and it's strange to talk about because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a revelation. It was physical. My body reacted before I had any conscious understanding of what was happening. There were moments when I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway and feel my chest tightening, or I'd hear the tone of her voice shift and my stomach would drop. My body was telling me, this isn't safe, long before my mind was willing to admit it.
So, your nervous system was responding to something you couldn't yet name.
Exactly. Trauma lives in the body. Even when the mind is rationalizing, minimizing, or explaining things away, the body keeps score. I remember one night in particular, we were sitting in the living room, and she made a comment that it wasn't even overtly cruel, just dismissive. But something in me recoiled. It felt like my whole system flinched. Not emotionally, physically.
What did that feel like?
Like a small collapse inside my chest. A tightening in my throat. A sense of shrinking, like my body was trying to make itself smaller to avoid being targeted. It was instinctive and automatic. And afterward, I remember thinking, why did I react like that? But instead of listening to that reaction, I blamed myself. I thought I was being overly sensitive.
That's a common response in abusive dynamics, turning the body's warning signals into self criticism.
Yes, narcissistic abuse trains you to distrust your own internal signals. So when your body tries to warn you, you interpret it as a flaw. But the body doesn't lie. It reacts to patterns long before the conscious mind catches up. Looking back, my body knew years before I did.
Was there a specific moment when the physical response became impossible to ignore?
There was. I remember standing at the kitchen sink one morning, washing dishes. She walked into the room, and without her saying a word, my shoulders tensed, my breath shortened, and my jaw clenched. It was like my body braced automatically. And in that moment, I had a thought I couldn't push away. If your body reacts like this to the person you're married to, something is deeply wrong.
That sounds like a turning point.
It was the first crack in the denial. My mind still tried to explain it away, stress, fatigue, anything but the truth. But my body had already made its decision. It had already recognized the danger. And once the body knows, it keeps sending signals. It keeps pushing. It keeps insisting.
So, the body became the first witness.
Yes, the body was the first witness, the first truth teller. It was the part of me that refused to be gaslit. It reacted to reality, even when I couldn't name it. And that's why, years later, when I stood in front of the starry night, something in my body recognized the honesty in that painting. It felt like the same part of me that had been whispering all along finally had a place to breathe.
It's powerful to think that your healing began not with a thought, but with a sensation.
It did. Healing began the moment I stopped overriding what my body was trying to tell me. The moment I realized that my physical reactions weren't weaknesses, they were warnings. They were wisdom. And once I started listening, everything began to change.
Thor, we've talked about the body knowing before the mind, about the internal conflict between loyalty and self preservation. But every story like this has a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes explosive, when something inside finally says, no more. What was your break point?
It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't even something she said. It was a dream. 3 dreams, Actually, 3 nights in a row, identical, unmistakable, and terrifying in their clarity.
The same dream each night?
Yes. Same message, same intensity, same sense of finality. It wasn't symbolic or abstract. It wasn't a metaphor I had to decode. It was a sentence, delivered like a warning from somewhere deep inside me. If you do not get out of this marriage, you will be killed. Not physically, necessarily, but something essential in me, my inner self, my clarity, my truth, was dying. And the dream was the first thing that said it out loud.
How did you feel when you woke up after the first night?
Shaken. My heart was pounding. My body was tense in a way I couldn't explain. But I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. That's what denial does. It tries to negotiate with the obvious.
And the second night?
The second night broke through the rationalization. When the same dream returned, word for word, I felt something inside me shift. It was like my subconscious was saying, "You didn't listen the first time." I woke up with the same pounding heart, the same tension, but now there was fear. Not fear of her, fear of what staying was doing to me.
And the third night?
The third night removed all doubt. When the dream came again, same message, same force, it felt like a line had been crossed. My mind couldn't deny it anymore. My body couldn't tolerate it anymore. It was like the deepest part of me had staged an intervention.
What did you do the next day?
I couldn't sleep in the bed anymore. I didn't think about it. I didn't plan it. I just grabbed my pillow and blanket and moved to the couch in the living room. It was instinct. My body made the decision before my mind could argue. The bed felt contaminated, heavy with the emotional reality I had been denying. The couch felt neutral, separate, like a place where I could breathe.
That sounds like a profound shift.
It was. It was the first physical boundary I had set in years. A small one, invisible to anyone else, but internally it was seismic. It was my body saying, "We're done pretending." And once I moved to the couch, something in me refused to go back.
Was that the moment you knew you had to leave?
It was the moment I knew staying was no longer survivable. The dreams had stripped away the denial. The physical reaction had stripped away the rationalizations. For the first time, I saw marriage not as something I needed to fix, but as something I needed to escape. And that realization didn't come from logic. It came from the part of me that had been fighting for my life in silence.
So, the breaking point wasn't a moment of anger. It was a moment of truth.
Exactly. It wasn't explosive. It was inevitable. The breaking point was the moment my inner self refused to die quietly. It was the moment the truth became louder than the fear. It was the moment I finally listened to the part of me that had been whispering for years. And once I heard it, really heard it, there was no going back.
Thor, you've described the breaking point with such clarity, the dreams, the physical shift to the couch, the moment your inner self refused to stay silent. But leaving a narcissistic marriage is rarely a single moment. How did you finally leave?
You're right. Leaving wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small, almost invisible steps that eventually formed a path. The dreams were the catalyst, but the actual leaving happened in stages: emotional, psychological, and finally physical.
Let's start with the emotional leaving. What did that look like?
Emotionally, I left before I ever walked out the door. After the third dream, something inside me detached. Not out of anger, out of clarity. It was like a cord snapped. I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped trying to earn her approval. It wasn't rebellion. It surrendered to the truth. I realized I couldn't save the marriage without destroying myself.
And psychologically?
Psychologically, the shift was even more profound. I started observing instead of absorbing. I watched her behavior the way you watch a storm from behind a window, aware of the danger but no longer standing in the rain. Every manipulation, every gaslighting moment, every cold withdrawal, it all became data instead of confusion. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it.
Did she notice the shift?
Yes. Narcissists always notice when their influence weakens. She became more controlling, more reactive, more unpredictable. But instead of pulling me back in, it pushed me further out. The more she tried to tighten her grip, the more I realized I had to leave.
What about physical leaving? How did that unfold?
It began with the couch. That was the first physical boundary I had set in years. And once I moved there, I never went back to bed. That small act created a psychological distance that grew every day. Then came the practical steps, quiet, deliberate, and private. I started gathering documents. I started saving money. I started imagining a life outside the marriage. And each step made the next one possible.
Was there a final moment when you walked out?
Yes, and it was surprisingly calm. There was no fight, no explosion, no dramatic goodbye. Just a moment of absolute clarity. I remember standing in the living room, looking around, and realizing, I don't belong here anymore. Not because I was unwanted, because I was unrecognizable. I packed a small bag. I didn't take much, just what I needed to survive the first few days. And then I left. Quietly, deliberately, without looking back.
What did it feel like to close the door behind you?
It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. It felt like stepping out of a fog into clean air. It felt like the first moment of truth I had allowed myself in a long time. But it also felt terrifying. Leaving a narcissist isn't just leaving a person. It's leaving the version of yourself they created. You walk out with nothing but your instincts and the faint memory of who you used to be.
And yet, you walked out.
I did. Because the dreams made one thing unmistakably clear. If I stayed, I would lose myself completely. Leaving wasn't a choice. It was survival.
And that was the beginning of reclaiming your life.
Yes. Leaving wasn't the end of the story. It was the first real beginning.
Thor, you've described the moment you walked out, the clarity, the quiet, the inevitability of it. But leaving a narcissistic marriage doesn't end the story. In many ways, it's where the real story begins. What were those first days like after you left?
They were surreal. There's no other word for it. It felt like stepping out of a dark room into bright sunlight. Your eyes don't know how to adjust. You're free, technically, but your nervous system hasn't caught up. The first days were a mix of relief, fear, numbness, and a strange kind of emptiness. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't grieving. I was just suspended
Suspended between what and what?
between whom I had been in the marriage and who I might become afterward. I didn't recognize myself yet. I didn't trust myself yet. I didn't even know what I liked to eat or what music I enjoyed. When you've spent years adapting to someone else's moods, preferences, and expectations, the absence of that person doesn't immediately feel like freedom. It feels like disorientation.
Did you feel safe?
Not at first. Even though I was physically away from her, my body was still living in marriage. My nervous system was still braced for impact. I kept waiting for the next criticism, the next cold withdrawal, the next emotional ambush. It took time for my body to understand that the danger was gone.
What did your days look like?
Quiet. Very quiet. I slept on the couch for a while. I remember waking up early, long before anyone else, because my body was still in survival mode. I'd sit with a cup of coffee and just breathe. Sometimes I cried without knowing why. Sometimes I felt nothing at all. Sometimes I felt a strange, fragile sense of possibility.
Did you doubt your decision?
Every hour. That's something people don't talk about enough. Leaving a narcissist doesn't immediately fill you with confidence. It fills you with questions. Was it really that bad? Did I overreact? Could I have tried harder? Am I the problem? Those questions aren't true. They're residue. They're the echo of years of gaslighting. But in the first days, they feel real.
How did you handle those doubts?
I kept returning to the dreams. Those 3 nights were my anchor. Whenever the doubt crept in, I remembered the clarity of that message. If you do not get out of this marriage, you will be killed. It reminded me that leaving wasn't impulsive. It was necessary.
What about your body? How did it respond in those first days?
My body was exhausted. Not tired, exhausted. Years of hypervigilance had taken a toll. I felt like I had run a marathon I didn't know I was running. But there were small signs of healing too. My breathing got deeper. My shoulders dropped. I slept more deeply than I had in years. It was like my body was finally allowed to exhale.
Did you feel lonely?
Yes. But it wasn't the loneliness of missing her. It was the loneliness of meeting myself again after years of absence. There's a moment after leaving when I realize you're not returning to who you were before the relationship, you're becoming someone new. And that transition is lonely, but it's also sacred.
Sacred in what way?
Because it's the first time in a long time that my life belongs to myself. My thoughts belong to me. My emotions belong to me. My future belongs to me. It's terrifying, but it's also the beginning of everything.
Or you've described the immediate aftermath, the numbness, the disorientation, the strange quiet of those first days. But leaving is only the beginning. What did the long process of rebuilding your identity look like?
It was slow, much slower than I expected. People think that once you leave, you snap back to who you were before the relationship. But that person is gone. Not in a tragic way, just in a real way. You can't go back to who you were before the trauma. You can only move forward into someone new.
Where did you start?
With the smallest things. What food I liked. What music I enjoyed. What clothes felt like me instead of what I preferred. It sounds trivial, but when you've spent years adapting to someone else's preferences, rediscovering your own is like learning a new language.
Did it feel overwhelming?
Sometimes. There were days when I felt like a blank page, no identity, no direction, just space. And space can be terrifying when you're used to living inside someone else's narrative. But there were also moments of quiet joy. The first time I laughed without checking if it was appropriate. The first time I planned without anticipating someone's reaction. The first time I felt my own preferences returning like small birds landing on a branch.
What role did your body play in this rebuilding?
A huge role. My body healed before my mind did. The tension slowly released. My breathing deepened. My sleep became less haunted. My shoulders dropped from their permanent defensive position. It was like my body was saying, "We're safe now. You can come back." And once my body softened, my identity had room to grow again.
Did you struggle with self-trust?
Every day. Gaslighting doesn't disappear when the relationship ends. It lingers in your thoughts. You second-guess yourself constantly. You question your memory, your instincts, your emotions. Rebuilding identity meant rebuilding trust in my own perception. That took time. It took patience. It took listening to the quiet signals inside me instead of overriding them.
What helped you reconnect with yourself?
Silence. Art. Nature. Journaling. Conversations with people who saw me clearly. And writing. Writing was a lifeline. It allowed me to hear my own voice again. But the biggest thing was learning to sit with myself without judgment. To ask, what do I feel? What do I want? What do I believe? Questions I hadn't asked in years.
Was there a moment when you realized you were becoming yourself again?
Yes. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a shift in the light. I remember walking outside one morning, feeling the sun on my face, and realizing I wasn't bracing for anything. No tension, no fear, no anticipation of someone else's reaction. Just presence. Just me. And in that moment, I thought, I'm coming back. Not to who I was, but to who I was meant to become.
So, rebuilding identity wasn't about restoration. It was about creation.
Exactly. Trauma takes things from you, but healing gives you the chance to build something truer, deeper, more grounded. I didn't rebuild the old version of myself. I built a new one who trusts my instincts, honors my boundaries, and refuses to abandon myself again.
And that's the real victory.
It is. Leaving saved my life. Rebuilding gave me back my soul.
Thor, you've described the long process of rebuilding your identity slowly, tender, and often disorienting. But you've also said something profound that your body healed before your mind did. What do you mean by that?
When you live in a narcissistic relationship, your mind becomes the battlefield. It gets twisted, confused, manipulated. But the body, your nervous system, never lies. It reacts to danger even when your mind is still rationalizing it. So, when I left, my mind was still full of doubt, guilt, and second guessing. But my body understood immediately that I was safe,
How did that show up physically?
in ways I didn't expect. My breathing changed first. It became deeper, slower. I didn't realize how shallow my breath had been for years until it suddenly wasn't. Then my shoulders dropped. I had been carrying them up near my ears without noticing. It was like my body finally said, "We can stop bracing now." I slept differently too. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but with a depth I hadn't felt in years. My body wasn't waiting for the next emotional ambush.
So, the body recognized safety before the mind could trust it.
Exactly. The mind was still negotiating with old narratives. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should go back. But the body didn't negotiate. It simply responded to the absence of danger. It relaxed. It softened. It began to repair itself.
Did you notice any emotional shifts connected to that physical healing?
Yes. As my body calmed, emotions I had suppressed for years started to surface. Not in a dramatic way, like thawing. Grief came first. Not grief for the marriage, but grief for myself, for the years I had lost, the parts of me I had abandoned. Then came anger. Not rage, but a clean, clarifying anger that said, I deserved better. And eventually, something softer emerged, self-compassion. That was the hardest one to allow,
Why was self compassion so difficult?
because narcissistic abuse teaches you that your needs are burdens, your feelings are wrong, and your pain is an inconvenience. So when kindness toward me started to appear, it felt foreign, almost dangerous. But my body welcomed it. My body responded to gentleness the way a starving person responds to food.
Did your body ever guide your healing in ways your mind didn't understand yet?
All the time. There were days when I felt exhausted for no reason. That wasn't depression. It was my nervous system finally shutting down the hypervigilance it had been running for years. There were moments when I'd cry without a story attached. That wasn't sad, it was released. And there were times when I felt drawn to silence, to nature, to stillness. My mind didn't know why, but my body did. It was seeking regulation, grounding, and safety.
It sounds like your body became the teacher.
It did. My mind had been trained to doubt itself, but my body had been telling the truth all along. It was my body that warned me during the marriage. It was my body that reacted to the dreams. It was my body that moved me to the couch. It was my body that exhaled when I left. And it was my body that led me back to myself.
So, healing wasn't a thought, it was a sensation.
Exactly. Healing began the moment I stopped overriding my body's signals and started listening to them. The mind eventually caught up. But the body knew the way home long before I did.
Thor, you've described how your body healed before your mind did, how your nervous system softened long before your thoughts caught up. But there's another thread running through your story: art, intuition, and clarity. How did those guide your recovery?
Art was the first thing that spoke to me honestly. Long before I had language for narcissistic abuse, long before I understood trauma, long before I could name what was happening inside me, art reflected it back. The Starry Night wasn't just a painting, it was a mirror. It showed me turbulence, but also truth, chaos, but also clarity. It showed me a version of myself I had forgotten existed.
So, art became a kind of compass.
Exactly. Art doesn't gaze at you. It doesn't distort your reality. It doesn't demand you shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Art tells the truth in a language the body understands. And after leaving the marriage, I needed that. I needed something that spoke directly to the part of me that had survived.
How did intuition come back into your life?
Slowly, and then all at once. Intuition is the first casualty of narcissistic abuse. You learn to override it, dismiss it, apologize for it. But once I left, intuition returned like a muscle waking up after years of disuse. At first, it was subtle, a feeling in my chest, a pull towards certain people and away from others, a sense of resonance when something was true. Then it became stronger, clearer, more insistent. Intuition became the voice I trusted when my mind was still tangled in old narratives.
Did art and intuition work together?
Absolutely. Art awakened intuition. Intuition sharpened clarity. Clarity guided healing. It was a cycle, a feedback loop of truth. There were moments when I'd stand in front of a painting or listen to a piece of music and feel something inside me aligned like a tuning fork hitting the right frequency. Those moments reminded me that I still had an inner world, a perception, a truth that belonged to me.
What about clarity? How did that emerge?
Clarity didn't arrive as a single revelation. It arrived in fragments. A sentence in a book, a moment of stillness, a memory that resurfaced with new meaning, a conversation with someone who saw me clearly. Clarity was the slow realization that my perception had been right all along, that the confusion wasn't mine, that the distortion wasn't mine, that the pain wasn't a sign of my failure, it was a sign of the environment I had been living in.
Was there a moment when all three art, intuition, and clarity came together?
Yes. There was a day when I revisited The Starry Night, not the original, but the memory of it. I was writing about that moment in Houston, and suddenly everything clicked. The painting wasn't just beautiful, it was honest. It was the first honest thing I had encountered in years. And in remembering that honesty, I realized something. My intuition had recognized the truth in that painting long before my mind could articulate it. That was clarity. That was guidance. That was the beginning of my return to myself.
So, art didn't just inspire you, it anchored you.
Yes. Art anchored me in truth when everything else felt unstable. Intuition guided me when my mind was still recovering. Clarity emerged as the reward for listening to both. Together, they formed a path back to myself, back to my vision, back to the part of me that refuses to be silenced.
And that path is what ultimately shaped the person you are now.
It did. Art gave me language. Intuition gave me direction. Clarity gave me freedom. And all three continue to guide me today.
Thor, you've walked us through the aftermath, the rebuilding, the return of intuition and clarity. But there's a moment many survivors describe, a moment when freedom stops being an idea and becomes a felt reality. Do you remember when that happened to you?
I do. And what's interesting is that it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a milestone or a celebration. It wasn't even a conscious thought. It was a moment of stillness.
Stillness.
Yes. I was walking outside early one morning, one of those quiet hours when the world hasn't fully woken up yet. The air was cool, the sky was soft, and for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for anything. No tension in my shoulders, no tightness in my chest, no scanning the environment for emotional danger. Just presence.
What did that feel like?
It felt like breathing with my whole body. It felt like my nervous system had finally caught up to the fact that I was safe. It felt like the first real exhale of my adult life. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't thinking about survival. I was simply existing. And existing felt enough.
So, freedom wasn't a decision, it was a sensation.
Exactly. Freedom arrived in my body before it arrived in my mind. It wasn't a thought like, I'm free now. It was a feeling, quiet, grounded, undeniable. It was the absence of fear, the absence of tension, the absence of someone else's voice inside my head.
Was there a specific moment that made it clear?
Yes. I remember hearing birds. Not metaphorically, literally. I was standing outside, and I heard birds singing, and it hit me. I hadn't heard birds very often, not because they weren't there, but because I had been too overwhelmed, too hypervigilant, too consumed by survival to notice them. That morning, I heard them, and I thought, if I can hear this, I'm alive again.
That's incredibly powerful.
It was. It was the moment I realized that freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. Freedom is quiet. It's the return of small things, breath, presence, sensation, curiosity. It's the ability to feel without fear, to think without distortion, to exist without shrinking.
Did that moment change anything for you?
Yes, it changed everything. Because once you feel freedom in your body, you stop negotiating with anything that threatens it. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. You stop shrinking for people who don't see you. You stop tolerating environments that suffocate your truth. That moment became my internal compass, a reference point, a promise to myself. Never again will I abandon the part of me that fought so hard to survive.
So, the moment you realized you were truly free wasn't about leaving the marriage. It was about returning to yourself.
Exactly. Leaving saved my life. But that morning, hearing the birds, feeling the stillness, that was the moment I got my life back. That was the moment I knew I'm not just out, I'm free.
Thor, you've taken us through the fog, the awakening, the leaving, the rebuilding, and the return of freedom. But there's one more layer I want to explore, something deeply human and deeply healing. If your present self could sit across from the version of you who was still inside that marriage, the one who was confused, exhausted, doubting himself, what would that conversation sound like?
Today, I see myself clearly. I am sitting there with my shoulders slightly hunched, eyes tired, breath shallow. I don't know I am drowning. I think I just tired. I think I just needs to try harder. I sit across from myself, and the first thing I feel is compassion. In the past, why do you look at me like that? Did I do something wrong? Today, I know you didn't do anything wrong in the past. I've been carrying something no one should carry alone. In the past, I don't understood. I were just overwhelmed. I were trying to fix things. I were trying to get better. I were trying not to make her upset. Today, I know better. I remember, but I need you to hear something, something no one told me back then. You're not the problem. You never were. In the past, then why does it feel like everything was my fault? Why do I feel like I were disappearing? Today, I am living in a reality that isn't her. Because someone has been rewriting my truth. Because you've been taught to doubt your instincts, your emotions, your memory. But none of that means you're broken. It means you're surviving. In the past, I were barely surviving. It did feel like surviving. It felt like failing. Today, my life feels it's the lie you've been fed. Survival doesn't always feel heroic. Sometimes it feels numb. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like waking up every day and trying again even though something inside you is collapsing. But I promise you, what you're doing right now is survival. Today, if that's true, why do I feel so alone? In the past, because you've been isolated from yourself. Not from the world, from you. But that's going to change. You're going to leave. You're going to rebuild. You're going to breathe again. And one day, you're going to hear birds singing and realize you're free. In the past, I weren't free? I can't imagine that. I can't even imagine a day without tension. Today you will. Your body will heal first. Your mind will follow. Art will guide you. Intuition will return. Clarity will become your compass. And you will become someone you can't see yet. Someone grounded. Someone whole. Someone who trusts himself again. In the past, but how do I get there? Today, I don't have to know the whole path. You only have to take the first step. And you will, the night the dreams come. The night your inner self refuses to stay silent. The night you move to the couch. That's when everything begins. In the past, I was scared. Today, I know. But I'm here. You become me. And I promise you, you make it out. You make it home. You become someone who will never abandon myself again.
That's a powerful conversation. What does it feel like to speak to your past self with that kind of clarity?
Today, it feels like closure. It feels like honoring the version of me who survived long enough for me to exist. It feels like gratitude. And it feels like a promise that I will never let myself go unheard again.
Thor, throughout this journey you've mentioned art, intuition, clarity. But there's another dimension woven through your story, creativity itself. Not just as expression, but as integration. How did creativity help you heal from trauma?
Creativity was the bridge between the parts of me that survived and the parts of me that needed to be rebuilt. Trauma fragments you. Creativity gathers the fragments and gives them a place to speak. It wasn't about producing something beautiful. It was about giving shape to what had been shapeless inside me.
What did that look like in practice?
It looked like writing before I understood what I was writing about. It looked like sketching emotions I didn't have words for yet. It looked like creating scenes, metaphors, and narratives that allowed my nervous system to process what my conscious mind couldn't face directly. Creativity became a safe container, one that could hold the truth without overwhelming me.
So, creativity wasn't an escape. It was a form of truth, telling.
Exactly. Trauma distorts your internal landscape. Creativity restores it. When I wrote about dreams, for example, I wasn't just documenting them, I was integrating them. I was giving my subconscious a voice. And when I revisited the starry night in my writing, I realized that the painting had been speaking to me long before I had the language to understand it. Creativity allowed me to decode that message.
Did creativity help you reconnect with your intuition?
Absolutely. Intuition speaks in images, sensations, metaphors, exactly the language of creativity. When I created, I wasn't thinking. I was listening. Listening to the part of me that had been silenced. Listening to the part of me that had survived. Creativity became a dialogue between my conscious mind and my deeper self.
What about clarity? How did creativity support that?
Clarity often arrived through creativity. I would write something that surprised me, something I didn't know I knew. I would draw something that revealed an emotion I hadn't admitted to myself. I would craft a narrative and suddenly see the pattern I had been living inside. Creativity made the invisible visible. It turned intuition into insight. It turned sensation into understanding.
Was there a moment when creativity directly shifted your healing?
Yes. There was a day when I wrote a dialogue, much like the one we just explored, between my past self and my present self. And in that dialogue, I realized something profound. I wasn't just healing from trauma. I was reclaiming authorship of my own story. For years, someone else had controlled the narrative of my life. Creativity gave it back to me.
That's powerful creativity as reclamation.
It is. Creativity allowed me to rewrite the internal script that had been shaped by manipulation and gaslighting. It allowed me to say, this is what happened. This is what it meant. This is who I am now. And in doing so, it integrated the trauma instead of letting it define me.
So, creativity wasn't just part of your healing, it was the architecture of it.
Yes. Creativity gave me a way to process what was too complex for linear thought. It gave me a way to feel without drowning. It gave me a way to rebuild without erasing what I had lived through. Creativity didn't just help me heal, it helped me transform.
And now, it's become part of your mission.
It has. Because I know what it feels like to lose your voice. And I know what it feels like to find it again through creation. My work now, my channel, my writing, my storytelling, isn't just content. It's a continuation of that integration. It's a way of offering others the same bridge that saved me.
Thor, we've traveled through every stage of this journey: the fog, the red flags, the gaslighting, the breaking point, the leaving, the aftermath, the rebuilding, the return of intuition, the rediscovery of creativity. and the moment you realized you were truly free. Before we close, I want to bring all of this together. If you were to step back and look at the entire arc of your story, from the first moment of confusion to the final moment of clarity, how would you describe the journey?
It's the story of someone who disappeared and then found his way back. Not in a straight line, not in a heroic leap, but in a series of small awakenings, each one pulling me closer to myself. When I look at the whole arc, I see three movements: losing myself, hearing myself, becoming myself. Everything fits into those three.
Let's walk through them. What does losing yourself mean in the context of your story?
It means the slow erosion of identity. It means adapting until you disappear. It means living in someone else's emotional weather system. It means doubting your instincts, silencing your needs, shrinking your presence. It means waking up one day and realizing you don't recognize your own reflection, not because you changed, but because you were rewritten.
And hearing yourself?
That's the turning point. It's the moment the inner voice, small, quiet, persistent, finally breaks through the noise. For me, it came through dreams, through my body's reactions, through art that told the truth, through intuition that refused to die. Hearing myself was the moment I realized the danger wasn't outside me, it was inside the life I was living.
And becoming yourself?
That's the long, slow, sacred part. It's rebuilding identity from the inside out. It's learning to trust your instincts again. It's reclaiming your preferences, your voice, your boundaries. It's discovering that freedom is quiet, not loud. It's realizing that healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be.
When you look at the entire arc, what stands out the most?
That the part of me I thought was weakest, the intuitive, sensitive, perceptive part, was actually the part that saved my life. It was the part that recognized the truth in Van Gogh's sky. The part that reacted to manipulation before my mind could name it. The part that sent me those dreams. The part that moved me to the couch. The part that exhaled when I left. That part, my inner self, never abandoned me, even when I abandoned it.
So, the story isn't just about surviving narcissistic abuse. It's about rediscovering the self that survived it.
Exactly. The story isn't about her. It's about me. It's about the part of me that refused to die. It's about the part of me that whispered through the fog, "This isn't who you are." It's about the part of me that guided me out, step by step, breath by breath. And it's about the part of me that now stands here, clear, grounded, whole, telling the story not from the wound, but from the wisdom.
If you could summarize the entire arc in one sentence, what would it be?
I would say, I walked through the darkness, but the light inside me never went out, and that light led me home.
And that is the story you now share with others.
Yes. Because if my story can help someone else hear their own inner voice, if it can help someone recognize the truth in their body, or trust their intuition, or take the first step toward freedom, then everything I lived through becomes part of something larger than pain. It becomes part of healing, part of clarity, part of purpose.
A final question, Thor. After everything, the trauma, the awakening,
The leaving, the rebuilding. Who are you now? I am someone who listens to myself. I am someone who trusts my intuition. I am someone who honors my boundaries. I am someone who creates truth, not fear. I am someone who will never again abandon the part of me that fought to survive. I am home. Today I want to speak to myself one last time, not as a warning, not as a guide, not as a rescuer, but as the man I became, the man I fought to become, the man who stands here now, whole. I don't need to brace anymore. I don't need to apologize for existing. I don't need to shrink to make someone else comfortable. I don't need to negotiate with my own truth. I survived something that tried to erase me. And I didn't just survive, I transformed. In the past, I still feel like I were carrying so much. The confusion, the guilt, the fear of making the wrong choice again. How do I let that go? Today, I don't let it go. I integrate it. I honor it. I understand that every scar I carry is a map that led myself out, a map that led me be here, a map that will keep me from ever walking back into the same darkness. I don't erase the past. I reclaim it. In the past, but what if I fail again? What if I lose myself again? Today, I won't. Not because life is predictable, but because I am different now. I listen to my body. I trust my intuition. I honor my boundaries. I know the sound of my own voice. And once a man hears his own truth clearly, he cannot be silenced again. In the past, I wish I could see what I see today. Today, I will. One day, I will wake up and realize I am not surviving anymore. I am just living. I will feel sunlight on my face and recognize it as myself. I will hear birds and realize I am finally present enough to notice them. I will create from a place of truth instead of fear. I will speak without flinching. I will breathe without bracing. And I will understand that freedom isn't a moment. It's a way of being. So, this is who I become in the past? Yes, today. I become someone who refuses to abandon myself. Someone who knows his worth without needing permission. Someone who can look at his own reflection and see a man, not a shadow. Someone who uses his story to illuminate the path for others still trapped in the fog. You become someone who came home.
Thor, that feels like the perfect closing note. A dialogue between who you were and who you are now. Not a goodbye, but a reconciliation.
Exactly. Today. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it so fully that it no longer defines you. It becomes part of your strength, part of your clarity, part of your mission. And now, I walk forward, whole, awake, free.
Thor Sivert Fritland, thank you so much for coming in today, sharing your breakup story from your narcissistic marriage, and followed by your years of healing process. Your insights always bring depth and clarity, and it's been a real privilege to have you with us again.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and the space to share my thoughts. It's been a meaningful conversation.
The pleasure is ours. We look forward to having you back in the future,